Welcome to the Project Endure podcast, the place where we talk about life, endurance, persistence, perspective, and so much more. I'm Joe Rinaldi, and I'll be your host. Let's jump in. Before we get started, let me share a quote with you. The great Les Brown once said, "You can't see the picture when you're in the frame." If you've felt stuck in your fitness, mindset, or life as a whole, head down to the link in the show notes and reach out to learn more about Project Endure Coaching so that we can help you step outside of the frame and bridge the gap between who you are now and who you want to be. We can't wait to hear from you. Now, let's get to the episode. Welcome back to the Project Endure podcast, episode 156. We have myself, Joe Rinaldi, and here in Philadelphia, we have a very, very, very special guest, Avery Marz. Avery, how are you?
I'm good, Joe. Thank you. And congrats on 156 episodes. That is a feat in itself. So it's awesome.
Thank you so much. I was just talking about this with someone else, but this podcast is such a joy for me to be able to do that 156 episodes just flies by, and I'll blink and I'm sure we'll be at 1,000 soon. So thank you for being part of this. And I'm so excited to hear more of your story and for you to share it with the world. And before we jump into any of that, how would you introduce yourself to people who are listening who have never met you before?
Yeah, good question. I am a law student at the moment. And that is something that has kind of taken over my life in good and bad ways for the last 3 years. And I'm a former Division I athlete. I am someone who is always looking to learn outside of school, outside of work. So I'm a very avid reader. And I really just like to work out and spend time with people in the fitness space, which is where I met you, which has been awesome. So a lot of different things that I'm involved in, but I kind of like it that way. And at the moment, like I said, just trying to get through law school with the bar coming this July. It's kind of taken over my identity for the time being, but that won't be the case for always. So.
Mm. So I think if I'm not mistaken, we met through Josh Holy, who's episode 144 of this podcast. How do you know Josh?
Just social media. I think once you follow one person in the fitness space from Philadelphia, end up seeing 10 more. And Josh is someone who has a really great message and really produces content that I think grabs your attention. One, because it does come from a genuine place, and knowing him now, I know that to be true. But also just because he has a lot of joy in what he puts out there. And I think when I go on my phone, I want to be happy. I don't want to see content that puts me in a bad place, because I think there's a lot of that content, whether it's the news or what's going on in the world. So to have someone like Josh and other people that I follow that actually are in good spirits, even when they're maybe down or having a bad day, I think is really helpful for me when I go online and kind of put myself out there. So.
And what I know about you, you're also the same. And I'll say this, you came to one of our stair workouts, and
Mhm.
it was 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning. We ran up and down the art museum steps for an hour. So first, anybody who willingly comes to that on a weekend morning, automatically has, a good place in my mind. And then I get back in the car. I don't think we really talked too much. You kind of group up, and you were with my wife, and we get in the car, and the first thing she says to me is, "You have to have Avery on the podcast." And so she told me a little bit about your story. I've heard a little bit more just through the grapevine, and I'm so excited to dig in. But first, tell me a little bit about law school and why you're pursuing that. Just because to me, law feels, I don't know what the word is, not fun.
Yeah, that's spot on, because again, anything hard and worthwhile I think can't be fun all the time.
Mm.
And it definitely has its moments of fun and joy that you find in the process of going through law school, but it's hard for a reason. And for me, I started out wanting to go to law school during 2020. And the reasons that I wanted to be a lawyer aren't the same now. And I think that's a product of time. 3 years changes who you are as a person, regardless of what you're going through. So the reasons I entered law school, I think, are very different than what I feel now. But at the end of the day, I really wanted to gain knowledge that my community didn't have access to. And I think in gaining that knowledge, I'm able to help my community in various ways. It might not be the work that I'm doing right out of law school, but it's receiving a phone call from a friend who has a problem, being able to talk to them about a contract that they're doing, or being able to talk to them about a family member in a situation they're going through. It's really, really beneficial to have a lawyer on speed dial in a way. And I know that. And I think that has given me a really deep sense of pride and has really motivated me through the non fun parts of law school. But you mentioned my stroke, and I'll say, after I had something that physically took me down like that in the way that it did, through paralysis and just feeling really out of my body, I found it was really important for me to invest in mind, like growth, I guess. So anything that challenged my mind, anything that couldn't be taken away from me from a physical perspective. And the law was that for me. It was, I'm going to go through 3 years of law school. I'm going to end up with a JD, which is a Juris Doctorate, but I'm also going to have all this knowledge that can't necessarily be taken from me in the way that I think my body may have things be taken away over time, whether that's through age or through disease or whatever may happen in my life. So that's a more of a broad, I guess, perspective, and that's more in hindsight. I see it that way, but it's definitely not fun all the time. And I'm glad for every moment of it, but it definitely gives you an interesting perspective on the world and yourself when you go through it.
Without a doubt. I'm wondering, is there a lesson from law that you think applies to life for anyone? And I asked that question coming from a place of, okay, I went to school, I got a doctorate degree in the world of physical therapy. And I think there's so many lessons from the human body and how we move and, how we recover from things that apply to just life. Is there anything from law that applies to life?
Yes, great question. It's making me think, which I love. So I would say that one thing law has taught me that's applicable to life is that nothing is ever as it seems. And I think law has showed me that because the answer is usually it depends, right? So someone will ask you, "Oh, will I get um a fine for this, or will I be arrested for X, or is this breaking the law?" The answer that all law students and attorneys will tell you is it depends. Everything is contextual. There's never or rarely a yes and no answer to things. And I think often in life, especially people who are highly motivated problem solvers, they're always looking for the yeses and the nos in order to kind of direct them into a certain path. Whereas law teaches you that everything needs context, everything has a different path than maybe you can see, and it's never going to be just kind of set in stone as to where you can go or what the answer is to some things, which can be really comforting but also really scary. I love when I know what the answer is, but I also think there's a lot of power in being able to mold the path to where you want to go.
It depends is the answer in the rehab world as well. And it's the most frustrating thing at times to hear when you're on the receiving end. And like you said, it can also be comforting because you know that there are variables and there's context and you can shape the path. You have some power over that. And so I'd love to keep that in mind as we talk about your story, but I'll just jump into kind of the big question I ask every guest, which is when you look back at your life this far, what is the hardest thing that you've ever had to handle that you did not choose for yourself?
Yeah, my hardest thing that I did not choose for myself is definitely suffering a acute ischemic stroke at 17 years old. Um, I in no way chose that for myself. No matter what I believe in destiny wise and faith wise. Um, and I think looking back on it now, it's going to be 10 years this August. Um, it was hard then, and it's hard now in a very different way. And I think no matter what you go through, we spoke about Josh earlier. I've listened to other podcasts that you've done, and everyone kind of has that story that they allude to. That's a challenge that they went through. But I think that challenge really never goes away. It just kind of molds and shapes and changes. And that's kind of how I feel now, being 10 years out. The challenge of coming over left side paralysis, which is what I had, head to toe, was paralyzed in a matter of seconds. Obviously, in saying that, you can hear where the difficulty is there. The difficulty is I can't move. I don't know why I can't move. When am I going to move again? Right? A lot of questions without many answers. And again, the answer then is it depends. And now I think I have a lot more answers with the physical side of things and where my body's at. But my mind is still grappling with what I went through. And 5 years out, it was very similar, where I finally overcame the physical paralysis. I overcame things that I was told were impossible in terms of my physical recovery, but hadn't even touched the mental side of the recovery. And that's why I think now, 10 years out, it's still the hardest thing I've gone through. It still will always be probably the hardest thing I go through. I'm hoping no other traumatic things happen in my life, which is kind of a false hope, I'm sure, because as long as you live, there will always be difficult things that you come across. But yeah, I think that hard also made law school a little bit easier, which might be the hardest thing someone else went through, even though they did choose it. So um, I say all that to say, definitely the hardest thing I didn't choose for myself. But in a weird way, if I could go back, I'd probably choose that it happened again.
Mm. After hearing 155 and more stories on and off the podcast like yours, in the way that somebody went through a struggle they didn't choose, it's not weird to me that you would say that. I think it could be jarring for some people to hear, oh my goodness, you would choose to have a stroke all over again. But I go back in my own mind, I wouldn't change the fact that I'm losing my sight. It's made me who I am, and I like who I am. And I think it takes going through that to understand it.
Mhm.
And so for you, I want to go back. I want to hear about, okay, you're 17, you're healthy, you're an athlete. And then what happened? Were you awake? Were you standing up? Were you sitting down? I mean, take us through that if you remember.
I do, yeah. My mom will say it's like it happened yesterday. But I was 17 years old, starting summer training at St. Joseph's University, where I was going to play Division I basketball for the women's team, and we had to be there for 6 weeks taking classes, training. I had completed the 6 weeks of training, done really well. Coaches will tell you things that sometimes are true, sometimes aren't, but was kind of slated to be the starting point guard that year, and just felt really on top of the world in every sense of that statement, just because I lived a very, I guess, like, joyful life and didn't really have to come across too many difficult things, in my first 17 years. And I just felt like this was just the culmination of all the hard work I put in, and, that I had deserved it. I deserved to be at this level, and was really just proud about that. And then went home for 2 weeks and was kind of just bringing back, like, a refrigerator, some sheets, like, for the fall semester, and again, I felt on top of the world. I felt like I had already kind of made my mark on the campus 6 weeks in, and coming back, I was in the dorm room with my parents, with my mom and my, teammate and roommate at the time, who I'd already lived with, and really just felt like, "All right, mom, let's go. Let's drop stuff off. See you later." Like, I live an hour or so away from home, so it wasn't like a big goodbye. It really just felt like I was stepping into my own, and being a woman and being a Division I athlete. Like, I was really ready for it. So I thought. And my mom and I lifted the fridge, and I felt my knee give out a little bit, and I thought, "Oh, like, I just tweaked it," as anyone would feel, like, kind of with a knee thing. Sat on my bed, and was kind of joking with my roommate, and within 5 seconds or so, completely collapsed onto the floor. And the dorm room had higher beds, twin beds. So it was a decent fall. And my roommate kind of laughed, thinking, what an idiot. You just like fell off the bed. And she realized then that I was completely paralyzed on my whole left side. My face had fully kind of sunk and dropped down. And my left arm was like pinned under my body. And I just said to my mom, just out of the side of my mouth, the right side, like, what's going on? I can't move. And my mom could see my face and said, Avery, I think you're having a stroke. And I was 17, I was healthy, strong as could be. I had no idea what a stroke was. So that meant nothing to me. And I just said, okay. And she called 911, and the ambulance was there from Lankenau Hospital within 5 minutes, very quick. Was eventually rushed to Lankenau Hospital, and they found the blood clot on the right side of my brain after some time because it was a little bit smaller. And that really became day one of my recovery, because with strokes, time is so, so important. Even Lankenau being only about 2 blocks away probably helped me to recover to where I am today. Having my mom know what was going on and not just say, Avery, get up. Like, are you just exhausted? Are you fatigued? Like, having her just be really aware of what was going on saved my life. And that's why now when I talk about my situation, it's really important for me that people understand, like, I was 17, it can happen to you tomorrow, and you need to know the signs, because often people don't want to hear the signs because they think it's not, that's not for me now. That's for me at 50. That's for me at 60. Like, tell me in a few years. And I'm like, no, like, you should know now, because it could be you, it could be your mom, it could be whoever. And it's just given me a lot of perspective in terms of like what I'm willing to um push off, right? Push off and say, "Oh, I'll get to that later." I realize now that a lot of things just need to be addressed in the moment, and you need to be able to just recognize that life is short and it really can happen to anyone at any time.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So looking back, were there any signs that you now know you could have seen this coming, or was there no way of telling?
I would say I had zero signs. I was not fatigued. I was not sluggish. I didn't have weakness on the left side of my body. I didn't feel mental fog. My sight was fine. I mean, I went through all the tests. They did everything. And it's interesting when you go through a medical condition of any kind, you kind of become a lab experiment to the doctors, especially when you're of healthy body, young age. They want to know, like, why did this happen to her? Like, what is going on? And they really looked at everything and could not figure out, and still to this day, outside of like family history that is like kind of deep and I don't know about it, or deep meaning years past, they don't know. And I think not knowing was really difficult for me early on, um, because in my mind, then I could just have another one tomorrow. And over time, I still have the same fear of like, what is going to happen to me? Is it going to happen again? But I've allowed myself to live my life in a way that I'm really proud of without fearing tomorrow just because it could happen. Because I could go downstairs to my mailbox and be run over, right? So fearing that a stroke is going to happen again is just as silly as any contingency that could happen in my life. So
So I think we should talk about this a little bit because you and I share a facet of our stories in common. And mine is when I was 10, I woke up one day and couldn't see out of my right eye. Yours was you're 17 one day and you're paralyzed on the left side of your body. Both just sudden, abrupt, unpredictable. We couldn't have known. And for a long time, and then I'm curious to hear your take on this. I did live with that fear. I woke up every day just afraid that I would open my eyes and not be able to see anything. And that crippled me in a lot of ways. I felt victim. I played the victim. I played small. I lived small. And it wasn't until years had passed that I realized that that was no way to live, and I couldn't control what was happening. And so I had to start to let go of that desire for the control and the anxiety attached to that. And I wake up now and I don't even think about it most days, right? I just live my life. This is my baseline. This is my normal. And like you said, any of us can wake up any day and anything could happen. And so there's this great Pablo Picasso quote, I believe. I believe it's him. He said, only put off until tomorrow what you are willing to die having left undone. And it's really hard for me to embrace that all the time. But having this condition in the back of my mind helps
Mhm.
me live with a sense of urgency for what's important. I don't know if you can relate.
100%. And I think it's something that's really difficult to communicate to others who maybe haven't had a similar experience. I know when I'm talking to you that you get it because you've been through it, as you said, in your own way. And I think that's one of I don't like the word burden, but I'm going to use it here just because I can't think of a better word. But when you go through something at a young age that a lot of friends, especially when it's a physical thing like a disease or an incident that happens or something autoimmune, anything that changes your life, um, it's really difficult to communicate how you're feeling and also what you're learning when you're going through that moment because people have so many questions. Like, yeah, kind of like you just said to me, how did it happen? Explain the day. Kind of, they want to know about you, but they also want to know how they can ensure that it doesn't happen to them, or they can do something that keeps them away from that experience or keeps them feeling safe from a similar experience happening to them. And I think when I try and communicate what happened to me, I try and communicate it in a way that it is still my experience and that I'm not trying to say too much of, hey, this could happen to you tomorrow, beware, because fear is a really difficult place to connect to people with, right? It's very difficult to use fear to connect. Fear can be used for a lot of different things. But if I really want to connect you and show you like why we should be grateful today, why we should cherish our health, I have to connect you in a very different way. And that's been a really difficult thing the last 10 years is finding the best way to connect to people by using my story and showing them like, yeah, I wake up at 5 in the morning or I wake up really early, but it's not because I just wanna be a hard ass, but it's because I feel this way about life and I don't wanna waste a second of it. Like, I truly don't. And I know it's harder for some people to get that message in the way that I want them to because they haven't had a similar experience.
Yeah. And so, for people listening who haven't had a similar experience, but want to soak up some of the wisdom that you've gained through your experience, what are some of the things that you've learned from, more of a mental mindset side through the work you've done over the past 10 years?
2 things I always come back to. One is related to therapy, and I think it's really important that we have outlets outside of, running 15 miles or whatever other coping mechanism, healthy or not, you choose to use. I think therapy is something that everyone should invest in. And I think what my stroke taught me, because it was very difficult for me to come to therapy, therapy was pushed on me very early after my stroke. Like I had therapists in my room day 2 at CHOP saying, "Oh, would you like to talk to somebody?" And I thought, "What am I talking to you about? I don't know what's going on. I can't even contextualize. I don't have the words. I don't have any emotion other than just anger and sadness to even put together to give to you, as my therapist, as somebody who wants to hear from me." So, what my stroke taught me was I finally came to therapy because I got over the need to have a reason. I think when people consider therapy, they're like, "Well, I'm fine. I don't have a reason to go." My mom says this all the time. I'm still working on it with her. I don't have a reason to go. You don't need a reason. It's very important that people understand you never need a reason to go to therapy other than you should go because it's available. Because now there are free ways to go to therapy. There are reduced cost ways to go to therapy because it is a resource that can help you to know yourself and to love yourself and to accept whatever happens to you and to accept however you respond to that. And having something so difficult happen to me, I had the biggest reason. I was paralyzed. Of course I would go to therapy. That's what people just thought. Of course you would go. And even then it was difficult for me. And I thought, if I'm not going to go now, I'm never going to go. And what
Mm.
kind of person am I going to be if I don't sit with myself? Obviously, someone else is in the room. Obviously, someone else is giving me notes. That's what a therapist does. But what you're doing is you're choosing to sit with yourself and all of your shit. And you're saying, here I am. Here it is. I don't know if you're going to solve anything, but I'm going to at least open myself up to the possibility that I can leave here a better person to myself than when I entered. Um, and I know that's a lot, and that's the first one. But I would say what the first one did was teach me the second lesson, which is the power of vulnerability and the power of sharing a lot of our darkness and a lot of things that plague us. And I think that's important because I don't want vulnerability just to be something that we do with one person,
Mm.
because I think that can be really heavy on that person. And it's usually a person we love with all of our heart. It's someone we trust, someone we care about, someone we value their opinion. But if I'm only vulnerable with that one person and don't embrace vulnerability on a larger scale, I then burden someone else that I really care about with a lot of heavy things. And that relationship tends to be kind of caught up in that heaviness a lot. And you kind of lose room for happiness and joy with that person. So I think if we as a society can be more vulnerable together with more people, when you meet new people, maybe you don't tell them the most traumatic thing that happened to you. But if you open yourself up to being vulnerable step by step, then you don't have to just share with just one person. You can give some things to some people, some things to another person, especially if they've gone through similar things. Those are the best people to talk to about it. The partner that you share something with or the friend that you share something with may not have a similar experience to you at all. And then in that case, they don't really have much to give to you other than just kind of a sounding board, right? So I think if we embrace vulnerability through therapy and just through larger scale groups, we're going to make this place, and I mean the world and our small spaces, just better to be in and better to grow in as well.
So I'll address both of your points with a thought
Yeah.
each. So for point number one, I agree with everything you said. And I think what you were saying, at least this is how I interpreted it, was that if someone can create a space for you to sit with yourself, because sometimes that's what it is, it's having a space, and by space I'll put that in air quotes, another human being, a setting, an appointment, an event where you can go and be with yourself and learn about yourself, even if that other person is there to listen. That's really, really powerful. And I think the stigma of therapy has lessened and lessened, especially over the past couple of years. But there's still a stigma there. And there are still stubborn people like you and me who will, kind of put up the fight to get in that door. And, if anybody listening is even on the fence, I would just encourage you to rewind 5 minutes and listen to what Avery said again. And so, point number two, I'll tell a quick story. On episode 35 of this podcast, I had my friend Danny Gavertz on. Danny and I went to college together, Bucknell University, first year of college. I walk onto the football team. He's already on the football team. I was in a season of life where I decided alcohol wasn't for me. And that was a little over 11 years ago. I haven't had a drink since. And one of the best decisions I've ever made. And I can talk about that a different time. But I was going through some hard stuff because I felt very isolated. I was part of this football team. I didn't really know anyone. I just walked on. I was now disconnected from all the friends I made in the first semester because they're still drinking and I'm not. Felt very alone. And I became friends with Danny, but just through football. And I really liked him, and I wanted to get him to know him better. But I just felt like he was probably out drinking, partying. He's a very likable guy, so I just kind of left him alone. So we go through college, we graduate, kind of stay connected. He moves to Maui. He does incredible stuff in the world of cinematography and on YouTube. And so he's out there doing his thing. My wife and I go there on our honeymoon, and we connect. We go to the beach together, and it was great to see him. And we're talking about college. And I don't know how it came up, but he just said, yeah, man, college sucked. I hated it. I didn't drink, and I would spend every Friday, Saturday night alone in my room, just kind of feeling down. And I was like, me too. And I realized in that moment that here are two guys who are just kind of putting up this facade. We're tough, we're good, everything's fine. We play football, we do whatever. And we were both hurting beneath the surface. And if one of us had just had the courage to be vulnerable enough to say, yeah, man, I don't have any plans, or hey, we should hang out, like go get a lift on a Friday night, the trajectory of our friendship could have been accelerated, changed. Like our whole experience could have been so different. My point being, I think we walk past people, we have coffee with people, we work with people, we know people who are hurting just as bad as we are on the inside oftentimes. And neither of us know because we're just putting up these walls and pretending that it's okay.
Yes. And thank you for sharing, because I think your perception of Danny and Danny's perception maybe of you, like you said, kind of held you both back from maybe having a different relationship. I know you said you still have one now, and that's beautiful, but maybe it would have been started a little bit earlier. And we had talked about like favorite quotes you had asked me, and my favorite quote is, vulnerability is the first thing I look for in you and the last thing I want you to see in me. And your story about Danny is pretty much that, which is if Danny would have showed you in some way that he wasn't drinking, or a little bit of vulnerability that you were looking for, you would have been more open to sharing it. But the last thing you wanted Danny to see was you being vulnerable and you maybe not drinking, or you wanting that friendship if maybe he didn't want it. And
Mm-hmm.
we hold ourselves back so much with the stories and the narratives we tell ourselves. And you're never going to find people who like the things you like, who value the same things you do, unless you live those values, unless you talk about what you like and what's important to you and put yourself out there. And I'm speaking from the perspective of a woman. And I know it's much more difficult for men
Mm-hmm.
to be vulnerable in the way that women are. My friendships are so important to me because of the vulnerability that they allow me to have. And it takes time and it takes work, but women have a very unique way of opening themselves up to one another in friend groups. And it's very normalized to cry in front of your girlfriends, to tell them a traumatic story, to tell them what happened at 5 that you didn't tell anyone else until now. Whereas men, again, my perspective as a woman, men don't have those spaces in their friend groups. And I'm sure there are individuals that maybe you feel you can do that with, but large groups of men in a room together are probably not sitting there crying and sharing their traumas. That's my perspective. And I actually want that for them. I want men to be able to open up in the way that women do. And it'll take a lot of societal change for that to happen. But if we don't start talking about it, then there's no way in which we get there.
Yeah. I believe your perception is accurate. It's my perception as well. And I'll say this episode will come out after this year's Project Endure event. But one of the things that I've really thought deep about and I have built the experience around this year is the fact that you are always one person, one conversation, and one experience away from a completely different life. And the hope, among others, is that people will come to this event and choose to be vulnerable and open themselves up and walk away with a new connection. Where at the beginning of the day, two people are strangers. At the end of the day, they feel like they have the start of a really strong friendship because of that shared vulnerability. And, it's not easy, like you said, but it's worth it. And so, with all of that being said, Avery, before it slips my mind, I'm going to throw in a connection that I think would be cool for you. So, Project Endure podcast episode 130, Sarah Martoni. You guys share so much in common. She also, for different reasons, was paralyzed at a point in her life, played professional hockey. She's an incredible human being, very much recovered and in the fitness space. And I just wanted to throw that out there. One, if anybody's listening and is enjoying what we're talking about, they would like that. But two, I think you guys would click. So, with that being said, let me ask you a different question. What's the hardest thing you've ever done on purpose and why have you chosen to do that thing?
I'm pausing to think.
Sure. We're gonna sit in the silence. I you know what, while you're talking and I break the silence that I just said I like when there's silence on podcasts because it allows me to think as the listener. So we're just gonna be quiet for a sec.
I'm ready to break the silence if you're ready.
Let's do it.
I'm glad we had a moment of silence before I answer this question because I think it's really important in talking about this that I kind of get it right and make sure I'm as honest as I can be in answering this question. Um, because as I said before, sometimes you create narratives and the narrative isn't always true as time changes. And I just want to make sure in answering this that I'm as honest as I can be. So I would say the hardest thing that I've gone through and continue to go through that I've chosen for myself is sobriety. And it was beautiful to hear you reached 11 years, I believe, alcohol free, which I do look at as a beautiful thing. And I think it's a gift that you've given yourself for those 11 years. And it's a gift that I've been trying to give myself for a really long time.
Mm,
And I'm working on it. And this is not the first time I've tried to go alcohol free in my life. And I hope it's the last time I try in the sense that I'm able to continue to live a life without alcohol in it. But I also know that with my personality, sometimes setting really, really hard boundaries um, can affect me in a way that I don't necessarily think is healthy. So I try more so to look at it as a process I'm going through,
mm,
which I'm going through this process of not drinking, of not centering alcohol in my life, in the weekends, in social events, in networking events. And that's a choice I make every day, as you do as well. When you choose to no longer drink alcohol or do drugs or whatever at some point was an addiction for you or felt really unhealthy for you personally, it's a choice every day. And it's a choice I hope I continue to make for myself. But it's very difficult for that same reason, which is I have to choose it every day and I have to continue to not drink. Because if I choose to drink tomorrow, then we kind of start all over, and that's okay too. I'm okay with that for me personally. But it's been a journey for sure.
I appreciate you sharing that as someone who is going through it and not is on the other side of it. And I agree with you. And I think that goes for a lot of things in life. It's a choice that we have to continue to make. Um, and I'm curious because, and I'm going to ask this question because I know there are other people listening to this podcast, and I know for a fact this is true, that either want to cut alcohol out of their lives or are trying to cut alcohol out of their lives as well. Would you mind sharing why and how you came to the conclusion that this was the move you wanted to make and the choice you wanted to pursue?
Yeah, I'd love to give some insight into that decision for me because it was something I really thought about and continue to think about. It was not a whim of a decision. And I struggle with the lifestyle that I now have at times because it is something that I have to explain to people in a way. It is something that being friends with who I'm friends with and being in spaces that I'm in, the reason as to why I'm not drinking is very forefront. It's
Mm,
very, why have you made this choice? And that's okay because I think it's important as I'm going to explain why I made this choice. But I also think we need to get to a place where the why is irrelevant,
mm,
that it does not matter why I chose to stop drinking. What matters is that that's the choice I made, and I'm hoping that I can be supported in that choice, regardless of the reason. And for me, the why has changed over time as life has changed. I, of course, value my health 10 times more after my stroke. I valued having a clear mind. I valued being able to get up in the morning and not be sluggish. And that would really be the easy answer. And sometimes I take that. Sometimes I tell people, I had a stroke at 17. And they're like, oh, that's why you don't drink. We get it. That is very digestible for people. And they didn't have a stroke, so they can keep drinking, right? They don't, why I stopped is not why they need to stop because they didn't have a stroke. And I understand that that's a very easy answer for myself and for others. But the real answer is I have a family history of alcoholism, amongst other things. It's always scared me slightly the way in which I like drinking, not necessarily that I overdrank or did anything crazy or got arrested or had any real repercussions of my drinking. I really didn't. I was just a college student and just lived my life, even into my 20s. But I always could tell internally I liked it more than my friends at times. And I just stopped being able to look at myself in the mirror after drinking and seeing the person I wanted to see. I didn't see her. She wasn't there. I didn't like the person that was looking back at me because it felt that person felt very different than the sober person that I do like and that I do and sit with and am very proud of that person. Um, and I think alcohol, amongst other things, is a coping mechanism when you're going through hard things, and it's an accepted coping mechanism. So again, my stroke, after 3 or 4 years, people understood if I maybe got too drunk or something, and I talked about it in the way of, "Yeah, I just, like, didn't like how much I drank last night," or whatever. They looked at it as, like, a coping mechanism, and it made sense that I was coping with alcohol, like, I'd been through some shit. That's kinda what it was looked at as, and now 10 years out, I'm like, "How long can I cope with the difficulty of life by drinking?" Even if it is 1 drink, I recognize it as
Mm.
a coping mechanism, and it was not getting me to a better place the next morning. It was getting me to a worse place. And it is, like I said, a continual process of acknowledging that I don't like who I am when I'm drinking, even if there's no consequence, even if I'm not a mean person when I'm drunk, whatever it may be. I kind of wish I had some of those consequences. I kind of wish something hit me in the face and I could have been like, all right, now everyone sees I need to stop this. But it was all internal. It was all with me. It was all feelings that I didn't like myself. And that's not fun. It's not fun. And alcohol is looked at as this really fun thing that you chase and, oh, it was a crazy night. And the way we talk about it so flippantly now really bothers me, obviously. But
Mm.
yeah, it's a learning experience. And I try not to be overly pessimistic about alcohol because I have a lot of friends that still drink. And again, I'm now about 6 months or so, I think I've been sober. I've gone as long as like a year and a half. It's been up and down. And I have my moments and I hope this time is longer than the last, and that's really all I can hope for myself. But I try to not demonize the people that drink alcohol. I try and demonize alcohol itself in a way, and separate the two.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Big time. I mean, a lot of what you said resonates with me and I'm sure others. And I mean, the other thing I'll say is it's refreshing to hear such an honest answer because it would be really easy to just use the stroke and dealing with that and all of that as the reason, right? But like you said earlier in the podcast about going to therapy or seeking help, like you don't need a reason. There's no need for justification if it's something that you feel like would benefit you, whether it's going to talk to someone or cutting alcohol out of your life. And I'll speak from my experience, and then I'm wondering if you go through any of this as well. Um, when I stopped drinking, people didn't understand it. And I felt like in order to honor that decision I made, the easiest thing, not saying it's the right thing, but the easiest thing was to go to the other extreme and isolate myself from everyone. And so for in that season for me when I was stopping drinking, it was me in the library at 11 p.m. on a Friday night and me at the gym at 11 p.m. on a Saturday night. And it was incredibly lonely, but that was the only way I knew how to do it, was to cut everybody else out. And it sounds like you're walking that line of, I still want these people to be in my life. I still care about these people. They're my friends. And I want to spend time with them without this other thing in my system. So, how do you navigate that piece?
Yeah, I think we're alike in the isolation, the isolation coping mechanism, I guess, which is if other people aren't doing what I'm going to do, I'm just going to be with just myself. And that's an extreme. And I find I'm very drawn to extremes. I think a lot of people um, choose different extremes at different times in their lives. And I'm always trying to find balance. If I'm not drinking, I don't want to work out 18 hours a day because I'm not drinking. Like, I don't want to push the lever that far to working out just because I have so much time now because I'm not drinking on the weekends. And I don't want to isolate myself so much and not see anybody, but I also don't want to be at a bar every weekend. So it's these counter extremes are always fighting one another and kind of pulling us left, pulling us right, pulling us up, pulling us down. And I really struggled with my inability to find balance in my life because I've always been obsessive. So I like to read. Like, I will read a whole book easily because I can't put it down and I need to finish. I need to get to the end. And that obsessiveness appears in my work. It's made me successful in law school. It's made me successful in basketball. It made me successful in a lot of things. But it also is a really big downfall that I have when it comes to alcohol because I push the lever too far that way at times. So I definitely to relate to forcing myself into isolation in order to step away from alcohol, in order to step away from certain things that I no longer valued in my life. And am so deeply grateful for people who pull me back to the center, who find a way to come and get me out of my apartment, to come and get me out of the gym, to come and get me from my face in a book and say, let's go get coffee. Let's go hike. Let's go sit and chat about whatever gossip. Something that is so trivial, but pulls me out of this really hard nosed, intense space that I find myself in. And without those people who bring me back to the center, I think I would be in a coping mechanism that is just as detrimental as alcohol was for me because it's still a form of isolation. It's still a form of lack of connection in a way. You're choosing to disassociate with life and with yourself and with your friends and people you care about. It's just happening in different ways. So even talking about this, I'm understanding it in a different way and trying to work through it as I talk. And I think that's what is so valuable about this podcast and about the spaces that you create. Because, like you said, they might not be a physical space, it might just be time, it might just be silence that allows people to work through what's going on inside them in a way that is really hard to find day to day.
I love what just happened, and I love the fact that you were able to talk through some of that. And because I think that's what happens inside of our minds if we allow the space for ourselves to do it. And I hope, and I would guess that what just happened is helpful for someone listening, if not many people. There are two things that I'll throw out here, and then we'll talk a little bit about endurance and what that means to you. One is a phrase that's not mine, but it's been said that it's important to go all in on the things you care about without becoming all consumed. So go all in without being all consumed. And that, to your point earlier, is such a hard balance to find, because it feels like those two things are the same. You know, if you're obsessed with something, if you go to the extreme, if you're even addicted to certain things, even if they're positive things, those things can consume us to the point where we isolate, where we miss out on what's truly important in life, other people and relationships. So that's one point. And then the other thing that I've thought about over the years is that I don't think balance is something that any of us ever find and hold on to. I think, balance is very fluid, it's dynamic, it's elusive. And I've almost seen my life more as managing seasons of imbalance. There are these sprints, there are these seasons where school takes, 80% of what I've got and family and friends get the other 20. And then there's another season where business gets 50, family gets 40, and fitness gets 10. And, it's always in flux. And I think somewhere there are these glimpses that we get at what balance feels like in that season and what we're striving for. But to your point of what you've said a couple times in this podcast, we are always changing. Who we are is constantly changing, and that balance is changing as we are. And so, all that to say is it's hard, and there's no one way that balance looks for any of us. So hopefully that's comforting in some way to somebody who's struggling to find balance. Um, so I told you I would get you out of here in time for bedtime, which, if anybody's listening, Avery and I apparently both go to bed at like 7:30 p.m. on weekdays. No shame.
None at all.
But
I'm in bed sleep by the time people, even get into their bedroom, and I'm totally okay with that, so.
me too. So all right, two questions to wrap up. One, this is the Project Endure podcast. What does the word endurance mean to you?
This is the Project Endure podcast, and I have thought about what endurance means to me, um, as of lately, as I'm going through this new phase of my life with running, which used to be a punishment as a Division I athlete. When you got in trouble, when you didn't do something right, you ran. So I've been facing endurance and the word itself, in a very unique way in the last couple of months. And I think for me, and a lot of people, endurance is continuing on when there's like a mounting desire to stop, when there's a lot of pain, when there's a lot of struggle. And for me, it's really important when I'm in that moment of pain, of struggle, that I remind myself what I'm capable of and what I've overcome in the past. That allows me then to really shift the perspective. And when I'm in that moment of pain and I have this desire to stop, I start to ask myself questions, what have I overcome before? Is this as bad as that? What really am I capable of? And another question I often come back to when I'm running or when I'm facing some type of pain or struggle that I feel I need to endure, whether that's law school or a family issue, is what if this is the life that I asked for? What if this is the life that I needed to learn something in? I'm somebody who believes in various things. I'm very spiritual. In a way, I believe in multiple lives and that we have different paths in this current life that we choose for ourselves. And for me, that's why I said I would choose my stroke again. If I could go back, I would choose that it happened because what if that's what I asked for? What if I asked for that struggle? What if I asked for that pain? And then I chose when it came to not endure it, to not overcome it, to say I quit, to stop trying. That would be something that would frustrate me and make me very angry to no end when I then find out this is exactly the life that I wanted. This is what I needed to learn about myself in a different way in this lifetime. And really just talking to myself and preparing myself for the next step, for the next pain that's along the way, for the next struggle. That's really what endurance is to me, is this constant conversation with yourself, asking yourself, why are you here? What is this for? What can you learn from this? I love questions. I very rarely come across answers in my life that I'm satisfied with, but questions, on the other hand, motivate me in a very unique way. And I've really loved hearing your questions because they've, again, not given me many answers, but gave me time to think about things and process things in a different way that I really, really appreciate.
Well, I appreciate that. And I'll say two quick things before I ask you the final question. One, I love this podcast because I ask the same four main questions to everyone, and everyone says things in just a little bit of a different way, and it clicks in different ways for different people. And for me, what you just said, what if this is the life that I asked for, just clicked in a brand new way. And, I think a lot of people would say, if asked, yes, I would like to be strong. Yes, I would like to be resilient. Yes, I would like to have perspective. Oh, okay, here's a stroke, right? Like that's how in this life you're going to get those things. And if you frame it in that light, it's like, okay, great. Like bring it on. Like, thank you for this because I'm going to learn and I'm going to grow and I'm going to be strong. And that's special. So thank you. And second, I'll say, I think it's okay to ask questions, to entertain questions, to ponder on questions and not come to conclusions. Like that's okay. The point of a question might not be to find the answer, and that's okay.
I totally agree. And I think it gives you space. Again, we've used that word a lot, space to change and to adapt and to grow. When you have a lot of answers, you're kind of stuck with them. You kind of identify with your ideas. And I've struggled with that in my life where I get these ideas in my head and I'm just totally identified with the idea. But if it's just a lot of questions and I leave it open, then I'm able to change. Tomorrow I can have a different answer. I can have a different way of looking at the same question, even though I might see it on my whiteboard every morning when I wake up. A Tuesday answer is very different than a Thursday answer. And that's how it should be. You should want to always be evolving. You should always want to be looking at things differently based on the things that you've learned from the day before. If I had the same answer to the same question all the time, I'd be worried. I would think, why I'm not being challenged enough. I'm not talking to people who are different than me. I'm not trying to seek out knowledge that maybe makes me uncomfortable. So I think it's really, really important to allow questions to enter your life. And like you said, not be so focused on having conclusions.
Mhm. So, with all of that being said, Avery, the last question of this podcast might be my favorite. And I have a feeling that we've touched on some of your answer already. But I want to hear whatever comes to mind. There are people out there who are going through hard things. Some of them they chose, some of them they didn't. If someone out there is in a dark season, a hard time, they have a lot of questions and no answers, and maybe just haven't had the space yet to process, what would you say to that person?
I'm going to turn this question, if you don't mind.
Let's do it.
Something I was told after my stroke that was really painful and really difficult for me at the time was everything happens for a reason. That answer bothered me then because I had no idea what the reason could be. I had a stroke at 17 years old. I was paralyzed. I didn't know if I would walk again. I didn't know if I'd play basketball again. My life had done a total 360. So for someone to tell me when I was going through something that everything happens for a reason made me really angry. And I feel it in my body right now, the anger I felt then. But what I'll say is that's not right. Everything doesn't happen for a reason. You give meaning, you give the reason over time. Nobody can say to you, everything happens for a reason. You have to find that reason. You have to figure out why you went through something and give it meaning. You give the reason to whatever the struggle is. So right now there might be no reason at all because you don't know because you're going through it and you can't figure it out and you have no idea what's going to come of it, but one day you'll be able to give meaning to the struggle that you're going through, and you'll find the reason on your own. And that is where the power in overcoming something is giving meaning to whatever it is that you go through in life.
One more question that pops up, and I promise this is quick. Were you told that you would never walk or run or do things again? Yeah.
I
W-
was.
What would you say if that doctor, those doctors, that medical team was listening to the podcast right now?
Thank you. That reality that I would never walk again, that reality that I would never play again, gave me more motivation than any other diagnosis, statement, support could have. And I'm so grateful that people were there to tell me you're going to overcome this and you're going to walk again and you're going to play. And that served its purpose as well. But without the doctors that told me you're never going to play again, you're definitely not going to play Division 1, the chances of you walking are X, I would not have overcome the stroke in the time frame that I did, in the way that I did. And for that, I'm grateful, even though they were wrong, because I again had to give meaning to the struggle and make sure they were wrong, right? I had to make sure that that wasn't going to happen, that I was going to live this great life that I live, which is the ability to wake up in the morning, use my 2 feet to go to the bathroom, go out for a run, go lift weights. I had to do that. And I had to choose that for myself. And without the fear and the possibility that I wouldn't be able to do those things, I would not be where I am today. So thank you.
I hope they're listening, and for anybody who is listening who wants to connect with you, say thank you, learn more about you. Where's the best place for people to do that?
Instagram, my Instagram is off to Mars, OFFTOMARZ. It was made when I was 12 years old by a dear, dear friend of mine. There's many planetary jokes that I've gotten over my lifetime, but Instagram is great. I'm also somebody who loves to meet up with people in person, grab coffee. Again, it'll help me not isolate myself if people want to go grab a coffee and hang out. So I'm really open for connection and really open to meet new people who are going through things and who have connected with my story or who just want to share their story with me. That's one thing that my stroke has given me is the ability to connect with people just by listening, not having to share much about myself, but just because they know I had a stroke, they feel that I can understand their situation in a unique way that maybe other people can't. So I'm here to listen. If you want to share your story, tell me what you've been through. I'm somebody that I hope people can be vulnerable with in that way.
Yeah. Well, Avery, I could talk to you for hours, but I know it's time for bed for both of us. Thank you so much for this, for how you show up in this world, for the light that you are to so many. And I'm so excited for the next time we get to link up, whether it's at a group run, for the event, for coffee, or all of the above. So thank you again.
Thank you so much. This has honestly been um, a great experience. I've learned so much about you and myself through this. So thank you for the space and for continuing to create spaces with Project Endure. People need it, and I'm grateful that I can attend anything moving forward. So thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Project Indoor podcast, go ahead and subscribe, leave a review on your platform of choice, and share this episode with a friend. It helps us get more conversations like this out to more people like you. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you next time. And one more thing. If you're looking for a community of people all striving to be better together, check out the Project Indoor Hard Things Club. The link is in the description below. We'd love to have you.